SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
Domex Fellam sa විසබීජ අවම කර දින 3ක් දක්වා ටොයිලට් එක ෆ්‍රෙෂ්ව තමයි. Domex.
Tonight, a blast from the past. Energy Minister moots a return to a fuel price formula but says a fuel price stabilisation fund is more suitable.
It is a right strategy even though it is the wrong timing.
Defence from whom? TMTK MP CV Vigneswaran criticises the government's defence spending.
But it is high time we realize that our so-called enemies are not Indians nor Maldivians, but our own people whom we want to repress through our armed forces.
Double trouble. New COVID variant from South Africa causes a stir with experts fearing impact on vaccine.
It will take a few weeks for us to understand what impact this variant has on any potential vaccines, for example. So right now, it's a variant that it's under monitoring.
Meanwhile, the president orders the import of COVID treatment pill. Make or break. A 5-member Supreme Court bench to hear the petitions against the Yugadanavi share transfer deal from Monday. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Friday, the 26th of November, 2021.
Nelly, මතකෙන් ගිලිහුණු black shiny කෙස් කලඹක රහස Sunsilk Black Shine සමගින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening. Welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammike Kanayaka. Now then, there was a sense of irony when Energy Minister Uday Gammanpila proposed a return to a fuel price formula, whilst also suggesting a fuel price stabilisation fund would be better suited for the island. The minister said that with the Treasury unable to provide funds, a fuel price stabilisation fund should be the way forward, with the fund bearing the brunt of the impact during good times as well as during bad times. A professor of economics, meanwhile, believes that a fuel price formula should have been looked at as a permanent solution. However, he questions the timing of it all.
Minister of Energy Uday Gammanpila announced today that adopting a fuel price formula at this junction in time would be the best solution to deal with rising global fuel prices. There is a certain degree of irony in the suggestion, as the fuel price formula introduced during the late Mangala Samaravira's tenure as a finance minister in the government of good governance was booed by the opposition, the then present energy minister included.
පසුගිය අමාත්‍ය මණ්ඩල රැස්වීමේදී ඉන්ධන මිල ස්ථායීකරණ අරමුදලක් පිහිටුවීමටත් අමාත්‍ය මණ්ඩල අනුමැතිය හිමි වුණා. ඉන්ධන මිල ස්ථායීකරණ අරමුදලකින් සිදුවෙන්නේ ලෝක වෙළඳ පොලේ ඉන්ධන මිල පහත වැටෙන විට එහි සම්පූර්ණ වාසියම ජනතාවට ලබා නොදී එයින් කොටසක් මේ අරමුදලට බැර කරනවා. ඒ වගේම ඉන්ධන මිල ලෝක වෙළඳ පොලේ ඉහළ යන විට එහි බර සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම ජනතාව මත පටවන්නේ නැතුව හැකිතාක් දුරට මේ අරමුදල විසින් දරා ගන්නවා. අපිට මේ අරමුදල පිහිටුවාම ජනතාවට ශනික සහන ලබා දීමේ හැකියාවක් නැහැ. මොකද මේ අරමුදලට අරමුදල් රැස් වෙන්නේ ලෝක වෙළඳ පොලේ මිල පහළ යනකොට මේ මාස 8 තුල 136කින් ලෝක වෙළඳ පොලේ කංජ තෙල් මිල ඉහළ ගොස් තිබේ. අපිට දැන් අරමුදලේ මුදල් ඇත්තෙත් නැහැ, භාණ්ඩාගාරයෙන් මුදල් දෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. මේ මොහොතේ කල යුත්තේ වහාම ශ්‍රී ලංකාවට මිල සූත්‍රයක් හඳුන්වා දීමයි. මංගලගේ මිල සූත්‍රයේ විවේචනය කරපු අපි මිල සූත්‍රයක් හඳුන්වා දෙන්න උත්සාහ කරන්නේ ඇයි කියලා සමහරු අපෙන් අහනවා. ඒ සූත්‍රය ඉදිරිපත් කරාට සූත්‍රයේ හැදෙන විදිය කවදාවත් හෙළි කළේ නැහැ. සරලවම කිව්වොත් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවට වඩාත් ගැලපෙන්නේ ඉන්ධන මිල ස්ථායීකරණ අරමුදලයි. හැබැයි මුකුත් නොකර ඉන්නවට වඩා මිල සූත්‍රය හෝ ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම රටට වාසිදායකයි.
However, experts say that the belief where the government is expected to control the prices of commodities under which successive generations are brought up is misguided. Senior Professor of the Department of Economics at the University of Colombo, Sirimal Abhiratna, who is an advocate against price controls, is of the view that the way forward should be a fuel price formula, but questions the timing.
We have been trained to believe that the government can control the prices, especially the prices of oil, that we have to import from the oil producing countries. In fact, today we are in a very difficult situation because the oil prices have gone up 4 times if we compare those prices about 1.5 years ago. Somebody has to bear this cost, whereas our taxpayers' money is not enough today to pay that. So the best strategy, as many other countries adopted, is to go into a pricing formula, allowing the world market prices to be reflected through our domestic prices. In that case, when the price goes up, the domestic price goes up too, and when the price goes down, the domestic price goes down too. Then it reflects the market prices. There is no burden on the government budget. In fact, in many other countries, this is the strategy that they have been following. Because of that, their oil prices keep changing every day or every week or every month. We have to go into that practice, but this is the worst time to do that. Why? Because we have a domestic supply shortage and we have inflation rising now, and because of this situation, the timing is wrong, but it's a right strategy even though it is the wrong timing.
At Parliament today, Minister of Agriculture Mahindananda Alutgamage said that a national policy for the country's agriculture sector that has been absent all this while has been prepared by his ministry. Meanwhile, parliamentarian of the Tamil Makkal Deshiya Kuttani, CV Vigneshwaran, criticised the government over its intended defence spending for the year 2022.
කෘෂිකර්ම අමාත්‍යාංශයට ජාතික ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් තිබෙන්නේ නැහැ. අද වෙනකොට අපේ අමාත්‍යාංශයේ ජාතික ප්‍රතිපත්තිය සකස් කරලා ඉවරයි. කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න පමණයි තියෙන්නේ. මෙතෙක් කල රටේ කෘෂිකර්මාන්තය ක්‍රියා කරේ පළාත් සභා 9 9 විදියකට, ගොවිජන සේවා දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව එක විදියකට, කෘෂිකර්ම දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව තව විදියකට. ඒ නිසා රටේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති 9ක් තිබුණ කෘෂිකර්මාන්තයට ජාතික ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් හදලා ඒ වැඩසටහන ආරම්භ කරලා කියන එක අපි සතුටින් කියන්න කැමැති. විතරක් නෙවෙයි කෘෂිකර්ම ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨයට අපිට කේන්ද්‍රගත කාර්මික තොරතුරු පද්ධතියක් තිබෙන්නේ නැහැ. අපිට දෙන සංඛ්‍යා ලේඛන ගොඩක් වැරදි. බොහෝ වෙලාවට අපි පොහොර බෙදනවා, වන්දි ගෙවනවා. මේ කිසි දෙයක සංඛ්‍යා ලේඛන නිවැරදි නැහැ. මේ වගේ දූෂණ අක්‍රමිකතා සිදු වෙනවා. අපේ රටේ කිසිම ශේෂ්ත්‍රයක මෙවැනි කේන්ද්‍රගත තොරතුරු පද්ධතියක් තිබෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ නිසා අපි පළවෙනි වතාවට ලංකා ඉතිහාසයේ කෘෂිකර්ම ශේෂ්ත්‍රය වෙනුවෙන් දත්ත ගබඩාවක් හදන්න අවශ්‍ය සියලු කටයුතු යොදලා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට පත්‍රිකාව අපි ඉදිරිපත් කරලා තියෙනවා. අතිගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ දැක්ම යපුන් නානයන ආර්ථිකයෙන් මිදලා නිෂ්පාදන ආර්ථිකයකට යන්න භෝග 13ක් අපි වෙත බාර දීලා තියෙනවා. අපේ රටේ නිෂ්පාදනය කර බුලුණු අපි අද ආනයනය කරනවා. අපි හදපු වල ටික අපි ආනයනය කරනවා. ඒ නිසා 20යි 24 වෙනකොට කෘෂිකර්ම ආස්ථාන්තයේ ලෑස්ති මේ සියලු ආනයනය නවත්තන්න. මේ ආනයනය නවත්තන්න නම් අපිට මිරිස් මෙට්‍රික් ටන් 50000ක් රටට අවශ්‍යයි. මේ 50000 හදන්න අපිට බීජ කිලෝ 2500ක් අවශ්‍යයි. ඒක වගා කරන්න භූමිය හෙක්ටයාර 10000ක් අවශ්‍යයි. ඒ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය බීජ මහනුවර දිස්ත්‍රික්කයේ හදලා ඉවරයි. ලුණු සඳහා අවශ්‍ය බීජ අපි මාතලේ දිස්ත්‍රික්කයේ හදලා ඉවරයි. අල සඳහා අවශ්‍ය බීජ නුවරඑළිය සීතැලිය ෆාම් එකේ අපි හදන්න අවශ්‍ය කටයුතු කරගෙන යනවා. පළවෙනි වතාවට මේ රටට බීජ බිලියන 2ක මිලියන 2000ක ආනයනය කරා. අපේ රටේ හදන්න පුළුවන් හැම බීජයක්ම අපි ආනයනය කරා. අපි යපු මානයන ආර්ථිකයකට පුරුදුනා. හැමදේම නැවෙනකම් බලාගෙන හිටියා. ඒ නිසා මේ රටේ නිෂ්පාදනය කළ හැකි සියල්ල මේ රටේ නිෂ්පාදනය කිරීමේ වගකීම කෘෂිකර්ම අමාත්‍යාංශයේ බාර අරගෙන කටයුතු කරලා තියෙනවා. අපි අවශ්‍ය සියලු බීජ ටික හදලා අපි ඊළඟ 20යි 24 වෙනකොට මේ ආනයන නවත්තලා මේ රටේ මේ සියලු දේ නිෂ්පාදනය කරන වැඩපිළිවෙල අපි හදලා ඉවරයි. දියර කිරි අපිට එක දවසකට US බිලියන 1ක අපි කිරි පිටි ආනයනය කරනවා. අපි දියර කිරි වලින් ස්වයං පෝෂණය කිරීමේ වැඩසටහන අපි ආරම්භ කරලා ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ බලාපොරොත්තුව එළඹෙන වසර තුර අඩු ගානේ 80ක් කිරි පිටි මේ රටේ නිෂ්පාදනය කරන්න. ඒ සඳහා අපි මහා පරමාණ ගොවි පොළවල් 4ක් ආරම්භ කරා. සතුන් 4200ක් පෞද්ගලික අංශයෙන් ගෙන්නවුවා. ඒ වගේම ඉන්න කිරි සතුන්ගේ කිරි ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි කරන්න ගවගාලවල හදලා කිරි නිෂ්පාදනය වැඩි කරන්න දවන් වැඩ කොටසක් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අපේ බලාපොරොත්තුව 2024 වෙනකොට මේ රටේ දියර කිරි වලින් 80ක් ස්වයං පෝෂණය කරන්න අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. ඉතිහාසයේ කෘෂිකර්ම ශේෂ්ත්‍රයේ එළවලු පළතුරු ශේෂ්ත්‍රයේ අපනයන වෙළඳපොළක් හරියට තිබුණේ නැහැ. අද වෙනකොට අපි අපනයන වෙළඳපොළක් කෘෂිකර්ම ශේෂ්ත්‍රයේ හදලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අද වෙනකොට අපේ අන්නාසි ටික දූර්යන් අනෝදා විශාල ප්‍රමාණයක් අපිට අද විශාල අපනයන වෙළඳපොළක් ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. මුළු පනතටම කෘෂිකර්ම දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව එක පිටුවයි තියෙන්නේ. හැබැයි තාම 48 හදපු කෘෂිකර්ම දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ පනත අද වෙනකන් සංශෝධනය කළා නැහැ. ඒ නිසා කෘෂිකර්ම දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ කෘෂිකර්ම අමාත්‍යාංශයේ තිබුණ සියලු අනපනත් සංශෝධනය කරන්න අවශ්‍ය වැඩපිළිවෙල හදලා අවශ්‍ය යුගයට අවශ්‍ය පරිදි මේ සියලු අනපනත් සංශෝධනය කරන්න අපි කටයුතු කරලා තියෙනවා.
In the meantime, parliamentarian of Tamil Makkal Deshiya Kuttani, CV Vigneshwaran, criticized the government's intended defence spending for 2022.
The government today on its part has started using the army more and more in order to control its dissatisfied people, Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim or others. The country now seems to be dependent entirely on its armed forces and its retired fraternity to run this government. The highest allocation in this budget has been made to the Ministry of Defence. Direct military allocation to all armed forces is a staggering 308 billion rupees. This is 12.3 of the total estimated government expenditure of rupees 2.5 trillion. This is an increase of 1.74% from the 2021 allocation. Use of the army seems to be given preference in recent times more and more. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Basil Rajapaksa, said in his budget speech the other day that the government employees have turned out to be a big financial burden on the country. But that is not so. Even after the war, continuing to keep an armed force far in excess of the country's needs, paying their salaries and other infrastructural dues, bringing back officers of the armed forces after their retirement, employing them in high governmental posts and in the foreign service has become a huge drain on the country's finances. It is not the government employees who are a drain on the country's finances. Maybe there is a lack of fraternal communication between the President and the Minister of Finance on these matters. The huge sum now paid to the armed forces, if reduced, could be used to pay off part of our foreign debts or on agricultural and irrigational projects. Despite the end of the war in 2009, the defence expenditure has been rising every year. There is an unfortunate slant given to the people by successive Sinhala majority governments that defence should be the most prioritised expenditure in the budget. Defence from whom is an unanswered question. This only shows that there is no real peace in this country, there is only absence of war. But it is high time we realise that our so-called enemies are not Indians nor Maldivians, but our own people whom we want to repress through our armed forces.
Sri Lankan ambassador to Japan, Sanjeev Gunasekara, says that there are Japanese companies looking at several arenas of investment in Sri Lanka, including at the port city. Speaking to Indivari Amwatta in our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, the Sri Lankan envoy asked for better choices from Japan that can help Sri Lanka at a time when Sri Lanka is in need of support.
What is Japan's sentiment when it comes to Sri Lanka's pivot towards China?
Their sentiments is like a good friend, but we try to set the record straight. We need borrowing, we need the help, and sometimes Sri Lanka has to make difficult decisions when they have bad choices. So when I speak to the Japanese official, what I say is, please give us better choices, and that's where your opportunity to help Sri Lanka. Because with the Paris Agreement, they insist we have to be a part of engage with the IMF, and my example is just because we use Ayurvedic, you cannot refuse us the Western medicine, or vice versa. So Sri Lanka's economic policy currently mimics Japan's economic policies in the 60s. It was a government-controlled open economic policy, and that's why they created these big companies that had the deep pockets who can invest for the longer term. And Sri Lanka, we need that. So that's why when we speak to the Japanese officials, the economists, we say, please, Sri Lanka was there for Japan. This is the time we need your assistance, and this is the time the valuations are down.
You said Japan says bad choices, you say give us better choices. But what is the response here? How is Japan looking at engaging with Sri Lanka to give us better choices if what Sri Lanka makes are bad choices?
It's basically minimize the preconditions, lend us money on lucrative projects, encourage the private investment to come to Sri Lanka, have the JBIC guarantee their investments. JBIC is their export development bank. Have JICA look at the good projects and be forthcoming. So this is what we need the Japanese help.
Does that mean also that here in Sri Lanka that we are not forthcoming, that Sri Lanka's either there is bureaucracy or there is red tape or there are bottlenecks here in Sri Lanka that prevents Japanese investments from coming in as much as they like or as much as you wish to bring them here to Sri Lanka?
Well, maybe sometimes the information is not forthcoming or not as transparent as we would like it to be, and that's part of the reason the Japanese bureaucracy nudges Sri Lanka to be part of the IMF, because at least when you are engaged with the IMF, you are supposed to share your macroeconomic indicators. So in short of engaging with the IMF, then we need to be transparent with our macroeconomic indicators and our forecasts with the governments that we are seeking funds from. And sometimes there are issues with the lack of information, but we are working through that. And then there is a perception issue. That's what we need to overcome. So the perception is something that after cancellation of some of the mega projects, the taste was not good. But now the communication between the upper echelon of the Sri Lankan government and Japan has been excellent. And I think we are looking very positively in the next years to come.
What sectors do you think are more likely to invest in Sri Lanka, or what sectors in Sri Lanka are more likely to attract Japanese investments?
The most favorite sector right now is the renewable energy sector. There are 2 to 3 companies that are interested in the renewable energy sector. Also, then these are the top 30 Japanese listed companies. Then there are a couple of companies looking at the organic agriculture arena, agricultural, also the organic fertilizer, that arena. And then there are a couple of companies that are looking at investing in Port City, construction, multi-family residential towers. So these are areas that we have been working on, promoting, and I think we will see some movement in the near future.
We have to look at establishing ventures here in Sri Lanka that will support a bigger export market for Sri Lanka there in Japan. How are you engaging with the Sri Lankan business community there, and what other facilities, infrastructure facilities and support will our business community there especially need to create that export economy for Sri Lanka?
I think in that lieu, some concessions or tax holidays, just like for foreign companies, having some structured tax holidays dedicated to Sri Lankan expatriates would be a good policy to start with, because there are Sri Lankan expatriates, I can talk for Japan, who are looking at investing and doing something for the country. So having some tax holidays or some incentives, additional incentives, will push them over the wait and see approach.
What's the general sentiment about the investment climate in Sri Lanka in Japan?
Well, policy consistency is needed. Stability is needed for any investor. So even for Sri Lankan expatriates, they are looking at that. But currently, we being a democracy and we having an investment agreement between Japan and Sri Lanka guarantees somewhat the investments. But policy consistency will help to build that confidence, and some country-specific policies for sure will help to build the confidence and move some of these investors who are on the fence to make that decision and make it happen.
We'll see you shortly. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, a 5-member Supreme Court judge bench will hear the fundamental rights petitions filed against the UGA share transfer deal from Monday. Meanwhile, the Ceylon Electricity Board's Joint Trade Union Alliance is adamant that it will continue the Work to Rule campaign, which they launched at noon today in protest of the UGA deal and the amendment to the Electricity Act.
The fundamental rights petitions filed against the government's decision to transfer 40% of shares in the West Coast Power Limited, which owns the Yugadanavi power plant in Kerawalapitiya, to the US company New Fortress Energy, were taken up today. The FR petitions were filed by the Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, Venerable L.A. Gunawansathera, the Samagi Janabalawegaya, former JVP MPs Sunil Handunetti and Vasantha Samarasinghe, and a group including Venerable Bengamue Nalakathera and Dr. Gunada Samarasekara and Dr. Vasantha Bandara. They seek a decision which invalidates the government's decision on the share transfer, with New Fortress planning to build an offshore liquefied natural gas receiving, storage and regasification terminal off the coast of Colombo. The petitioners claim that the deal gives a monopoly to the US company concerned and that a proper tender process hasn't been followed in the deal. Further, they charge that the government's decision to transfer the shares to New Fortress Energy, made sans a proper study of facts, violates the fundamental rights of the people. During today's proceedings, it was decided that a 5-member Supreme Court bench chaired by Chief Justice Jayantha Jayasuriya will hear the petitions on coming Monday, the 29th of November. The Attorney General represented the Prime Minister and other ministers of the Cabinet. However, Ministers Vimal Weerawansa, Vasudeva Nanayakara, and Udaya Gammanpilla, who are also cabinet members, were represented by a private legal counsel. President's counsel Udita Igalahava told the court that he will be representing the trio. In the meantime, speaking to media today, Minister Vasudeva Nanayakara insisted that the Yugadanavi power plant share transfer deal is malignant to the country. A silent protest was also worked off this morning by members of the Ceylon Electricity Board's Joint Trade Union Alliance and the Supreme Court against the relevant share transfer and the amendment to the Electricity Act. They say that the Work to Rule campaign that was launched at noon today will be continued, and on the 8th of December, all CB employees will withdraw from services at the power plants and flock at the Fort railway station.
Now, shifting our focus towards the pandemic situation, South African scientists raised alarms over the discovery of a new COVID-19 variant among 22 people in the country. Health experts there say that the danger posed by the new variant lies in over 30 mutations that have been identified from its spike protein. With the new variant identified in Botswana as well as in Hong Kong, the World Health Organization says that they are keeping a keen eye on the situation.
Many countries world over have faced multiple waves of the COVID-19 virus in the past. Some of them were brought on by the emergence of new variants of the virus. So far, the World Health Organization has listed 4 variants of concern, namely Alpha, Beta, Gamma and Delta. The worst among them is the highly transmissible and deadly Delta variant. But now, there is another threat that might make the world's virus-related problems even bigger. It comes in the form of a new variant called B.1.1.529 and has been discovered from South Africa. Director of the Center for Epidemic Response and Innovation in South Africa, Professor Tulio de Oliveira says that there has been an unusual constellation of mutations and that it had evolved faster than any other variant. From about 50 mutations that had been observed from the new variant, more than 60 had been observed on the spike protein. The spike protein is the target of most vaccines and the key the virus uses to unlock the doorway into our body's cells. Director of the Genetics Institute at the University College London, Francois Below, meanwhile suspects that the new variant would have likely evolved during a chronic infection of an immunocompromised person, possibly in an untreated HIV or AIDS patient. So far, 22 cases of the new variant has been detected in South Africa, 4 in Botswana and 2 in Hong Kong. The World Health Organization is currently monitoring the situation.
There are fewer than 100 full genome sequences that are available. We don't know very much about this yet. What we do know is that this variant has a large number of mutations. And the concern is that when you have so many mutations, it can have an impact on how the virus behaves. So right now, researchers are getting together to understand where these mutations are in the spike protein and the furin cleavage site and what that potentially may mean for our diagnostics, our therapeutics, and our vaccines. These types of variants and being detected, it's good that they are being detected. It means that we have a system in place. It will take a few weeks for us to understand what impact this variant has on any potential vaccines, for example. Our technical advisory group on virus evolution is discussing this with our colleagues in South Africa. So right now, it's a variant that it's under monitoring. The virus evolution working group, or the TAG VE, will discuss if it will become a variant of interest or a variant of concern, and if that's the case, we will assign it a Greek name. But it is something to watch. And I think, besides this B.1.1.529,
even at the dawn of a new COVID variant, the World Health Organization is urging countries not to forget the age-old foe, the Delta variant.
But don't forget, we still have the Delta variant, which is also evolving. And there are at least 30 sublineages of Delta that we are tracking. We've reported on the Delta sublineage AY4.2, which has been reported from the UK. And in this sublineage, there's a suggestion that this variant has increased transmissibility slightly over the Delta variant. So the virus has a lot of room to change.
These revelations and cautions come at a time when new cases in some parts of the world, especially in Europe, as well as in Sri Lanka, are on the rise. To add to that, a global festive season is almost upon us, Christmas. Just as it does with the Sinhala and Tamil New Year season, the Christmas season too compels people to go shopping.
ප්‍රචාරණය වෙලා තියෙනවා සාප්පු සවාරිය ආරම්භ කිරීමට නියමිත දවසක් හැටියට අලුත් ප්‍රවණතාවයක් හැටියට ආද සිකුරාදා දිනය මේ තත්වය නිසි පරිදි කළමනාකරණය කර ගැනීමයි වැදගත් වන්නේ සාප්පු යෑම අද ඉඳලා පටන් ගන්න එක මගේ හිතේ ප්‍රමාද කරනවාට වඩා හොඳයි නමුත් සෞඛ්‍ය පුරුදු වලට අනුව ඒ කාර්යය කළමනා කර ගැනීමේ වැදගත්කම
Sri Lanka's bitter memories of the post-Sinhala and Tamil New Year, as carefree social mixing during April brought about thousands of deaths and infections. But the message today, as it did then, is not to abuse the freedom accorded.
ඒ ලිහිල් කරලා අපි ඒක පවත්වාගෙන යන්නේ මේ උත්සව සමයේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් පොදුවේ සමාජික වශයෙන් ආධ්‍යාත්මික වශයෙන් මේ උත්සව සමයත් එක්ක බැඳුණු අවශ්‍යතාවන් ඉෂ්ට කර ගැනීමට තමයි අපි ඒ අවස්ථාව ලබා දෙන්නේ. නමුත් ඒ අවස්ථාව රෝගයේ පැතිරීමට තුඩු දෙන ලෙසින් යම්කිසි ඉඩකඩක් පැහැදිලිවම පේනවා නම් අපිට කරන්න පුළුවන් දේ තමයි සමහර විට මේ මාර්ගෝපදේශ දැඩි කිරීම.
We've never meant lockdown when we say public health and social measures. It's a combination of interventions with physical distancing, some movement restriction in some situations, making sure that we have disinfection, we have good ventilation, we wear masks, we avoid crowded spaces. All of those interventions provide an opportunity for a layered approach. But when you add those layers on, when you start to lift them and you take those layers off, they need to be done carefully. If you take all of those layers off at once, the virus will resurge. And that's what we are continuing to see. And in the context of the Delta variant, which is much more transmissible than the original strain, the ancestral strain, if you have that in the context of increasing of people mixing, the virus will thrive.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today instructed officials to import the world's first oral antiviral drug, molnupiravir, during the meeting of the Special Committee on COVID-19. The directive comes at a time when the World Health Organization is critical of countries for lulling themselves into a false sense of security over the vaccine against COVID. Just as the vaccine, the pill too reduces hospitalizations and deaths.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today instructed State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasumana, to take measures to import the oral antiviral drug molnupiravir. The drug is the world's first oral treatment developed against the COVID-19 virus. This was communicated when the Special Committee on COVID-19 Control met today. During the meeting, it was also decided to give the booster dose to all over 60s who had the second dose at least 3 months ago through a mobile vaccination service. In addition, it was also decided to take measures to make the booster dose available to people over the age of 60 visiting hospital clinics. Further, the Director General of Health Services said at the meeting that the booster dose will now be administered to immunocompromised persons over the age of 20 on Saturdays at their nearest MOH office. By last evening, the booster dose had been given to 420,511 people. Meanwhile, by the same time, 13,725,136 had been completely inoculated, with 2,194,059 persons awaiting the second dose. In the meantime, the World Health Organization warns that many countries have lulled themselves into a false sense of security about the protection given by the vaccine. Singling out Europe, the WHO chief noted that more than 60% of all reported COVID cases and deaths across the globe are from the region.
We're concerned about a false sense of security that vaccines have ended the pandemic and that people who are vaccinated do not need to take any other precautions. Vaccines save lives, but they do not fully prevent transmission. Data suggests that before the arrival of the Delta variant, vaccines reduced transmission by about 60%. With Delta, that has dropped to about 40%. While Europe is again the epicenter of the pandemic, no country or region is out of the woods.
The Minister of Education has announced the Christmas holiday dates for all government and Catholic schools. The schools will close on the 23rd of December in view of the seasonal holidays. The holiday, however, will be just for 4 days, and the schools will reopen on Monday, the 27th of December. Now then, taking a look at the Colombo Bourse, the Colombo All-Share Price Index closed at a record high after gaining 171.95 points to close at 11,197.68. Meanwhile, the S&P SL 20 index of more liquid stocks rose by 55.20 points to close at 3,822.61. Here's Achudan Srirangan with an update on how the market performed today.
The Bros ended firmly on the green zone, exceeding the bullish trend for the second consecutive day and posting the all-time high. And the market skyrocketed more than 100 points during the day, the first 5 minutes, and for the session trading on volatile market. ASP increased by the week for 639 points during the week, successfully closed at 11,198 and gaining 172 points for the day. And turnover was 9.1 billion turnover, which only contributed by the 48% from the food and beverage, tobacco sectors and capital good sectors. And when you take the number of trades for today, it's a 58,435. This is a quite large number of trades that posted in the market.
In the meantime, the rupee remained unchanged at 202.99 cents against the US dollar today. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee fared against other major currencies during the day. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.